What would you do if your quiet neighbor suddenly did something so unexpected, it left you questioning everything you thought you knew about them? This one gesture changed the way I see people, and it might change you too. I remember the moment like it happened just yesterday, though months have passed since then. The wind outside that afternoon had a certain crispness to it, the kind that stirs the dry leaves in little spirals along the pavement and carries with it the smell of distant rain and distant change. I had just set my cup of tea on the window ledge, the steam curling upward like a ghost in no hurry to rise. My street had always been quiet. A cul-de-sac lined with old maples and homes whose paint had long since faded into the comforting tones of familiarity. Everyone kept to themselves for the most part. Neighbors nodded politely over hedges, waved at each other from driveways, but rarely crossed thresholds. Then there was Mr. Hemsworth. He lived 2 doors down. A tall, slender man in his late 60s, though his posture added a few years. And his eyes perhaps subtracted them. He was the kind of neighbor one might call distant, but never rude. He mowed his lawn every Saturday at precisely 9 a.m., wore the same olive green cardigan on chilly days, and could be seen walking his dog, Winston, rain or shine. I never expected anything unusual from him. Truth be told, I barely knew the man. He seemed like a fixture of the street, like the old lamppost near the corner that never quite turned on fully. But that day, everything changed with a knock. It was the kind of knock you don't forget. Not urgent, not timid. Just steady. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the mail had already come. My first thought, embarrassingly, was that I'd left something unpaid. Perhaps a meter reader or a neighborhood inspector. When I opened the door, there he stood. Mr. Hemsworth. He held a small, wrapped parcel in both hands. His cardigan buttoned all the way up, his face unreadable but not unfriendly. "Good afternoon," he said, with a slight smile. "I hope I'm not intruding. Well, I have something for you." I blinked. "For me?" He extended the parcel. "Just something I found. Something I think might belong to you, or at least, speak to you." What an odd choice of words. I took the package. It was light, wrapped in old-fashioned brown paper, tied with twine. No card, no return address. The kind of thing you'd expect to see in an old movie, not in real life. "Thank you," I said, unsure of what else to offer. He nodded once, turned, and walked away down the front steps. I didn't call after him. Something in the moment told me not to. I closed the door, heart ticking just a bit faster than before. I turned the parcel in my hands. No name, no markings. I set it on the kitchen table, stared at it like it might hiss open on its own. I waited an hour before opening it. I don't know why. Maybe it felt like a test, like something sacred. Or maybe I just didn't want whatever magic was inside to end. When I did finally untie the twine and fold back the paper, I found a small, leather-bound journal inside. It was old, worn at the corners, with yellowing pages. On the inside cover, in neat cursive script, it read, "Property of Eliza A. Trenham 1947. My breath caught. That was my grandmother's name. I stared at the name inside the journal like I'd seen a ghost. Eliza A. Trenham. Not a common name. Not even one many outside my family would know. And yet, here it was, delicately written in black ink, as though she had only signed it yesterday. My grandmother had passed away when I was just 11 years old. I remembered her in fragments, her floral aprons, the cinnamon cookies she always burned slightly on purpose, and the way she used to say, "Nothing worth knowing is ever in plain sight." I never quite understood what she meant. At least, not then. How on earth had this journal come into Mr. Hemsworth's hands? Had it really belonged to my grandmother? Or was it some strange coincidence? I flipped through the first few pages carefully. The paper felt delicate, almost like onion skin. Each page was filled with flowing, old-fashioned handwriting. I didn't recognize it immediately, but as I read on, something in the phrasing, the rhythm, started to feel oddly familiar. April 17, 1947. There is something about this house that makes my thoughts more alive. As if the walls are listening. As if they are waiting for me to remember something long forgotten. It was poetic, haunting even. I turned another page. I heard the music again last night. It came from the attic, though no one has been up there since the war. It sounds like my brother's old violin, but sweeter, sadder. I paused. What attic? My grandmother had never mentioned an attic in any home she lived in. As far as I knew, she'd spent most of her life in a small cottage in Windmere Hollow, then moved to a townhome in Silver Creek after my grandfather passed away. I flipped ahead to another entry. It was dated May 3, 1947. The neighbor with the silver spectacles looked at me strangely today. He said he used to know the people who lived here before. He asked if I'd found it yet. I pretended not to understand, but I think he knows that I know. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't just a diary. It was a story she never told anyone. A secret life. But how had Mr. Hemsworth gotten it? I couldn't ignore the coincidence. I needed answers. My first instinct was to knock on his door immediately, but something in me hesitated. Instead, I took the journal upstairs, set it gently on my writing desk, and just sat for a moment. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip low on the horizon, casting a golden hue across the tops of the trees. The birds had quieted, and the wind had slowed. I opened the window and let the cool air in. I needed to think. I needed to remember. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept the journal on my nightstand, its presence somehow louder than silence. Around midnight, I gave up trying. I turned on the lamp and opened it again. Further into the pages, her writing became less structured. More hurried. More emotional. June 1, 1947. Something is wrong. I hear whispers when I walk past the cellar door. And last night, I swear, someone was standing at the edge of my bed. Watching. Was she imagining things? Or had something truly disturbed her? And more urgently, how did my neighbor end up with this journal? At first light, I brewed a pot of strong coffee and stood on my front steps, watching his house 2 doors down. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe a sign. Maybe Winston's familiar bark as they headed out for their daily walk. But the hours passed. No sign of him. By noon, I made up my mind. I tucked the journal under my arm, crossed the street, and walked up the path to Mr. Hemsworth's door. His house was as neatly kept as always. The bushes trimmed, the walkway clear. I rang the bell once. No answer. I knocked. Still nothing. Just as I turned to leave, I heard the latch click. The door opened slowly, but it wasn't Mr. Hemsworth who answered. It was a young woman, no older than 30. Her eyes were tired but kind, and she wore a sweater far too big for her. "Can I help you?" she asked. I'm looking for Mr. Hemsworth," I said, surprised. Her expression softened. "You must be one of the neighbors. I'm his granddaughter. He's not here right now." "Oh," I said, suddenly feeling awkward. "Sorry to bother you. He left something with me yesterday and I just wanted to ask him about it." Her brow furrowed. "Yesterday?" "Yes," I said. "Afternoon. He brought me this." I held out the journal. She looked at it, and the color drained from her face. "That's not possible," she said. I blinked. "I'm sorry? My grandfather, he passed away last Thursday." I stood there, frozen on the porch, the journal suddenly heavy in my hands. Her words echoed in my ears. "He passed away last Thursday." "That can't be," I whispered, not sure if I was speaking to her or myself. I saw him, yesterday. Right there at my door. He gave me this. He spoke to me. She looked at me with a strange mixture of sympathy and unease. I believe you saw something. I really do. You're not the first neighbor who's come by saying odd things since he passed. My grandfather was, well, he was complicated. He had a way of lingering. I felt my throat dry. Lingering? She glanced over her shoulder into the house, then stepped outside and gently closed the door behind her. Her voice lowered. He was a kind man. Quiet, but there were things he knew, things he carried. Ever since I was a child, he'd tell me that life didn't always move in one direction. That sometimes, the past circles back around and taps us on the shoulder. Sometimes to haunt, sometimes to help. She pointed at the journal. That belonged to someone he never stopped talking about. A woman named Eliza. Said she was part of a circle unfinished. I thought it was one of his metaphors. He said she was connected to the house across the street. Yours? I nodded slowly. Her eyes met mine. Then maybe he came to finish what he couldn't while he was alive. I swallowed hard, the air around me suddenly cooler despite the late afternoon sun. Do you mind if I ask how he died? She looked down, peacefully, in his sleep. We found him with that cardigan he always wore, sitting in his armchair with Winston by his side. I remembered the cardigan, the same one he wore just yesterday. Or, what I thought was yesterday. She seemed to sense my thoughts and placed a gentle hand on my arm. Whatever you think happened, you're not crazy. My grandfather used to say that, moments find the right people when the world is ready. Maybe he chose you for a reason. I wanted to believe her. But part of me still clung to logic, to timelines, to certainty. I thanked her, excused myself, and made the slow walk back to my home, journal pressed against my chest like a relic. That evening, I lit a fire even though it wasn't cold. I needed the warmth, the flicker, something alive and comforting. I curled into the armchair by the hearth, opened the journal once again, and began reading in earnest. June 12, 1947. I saw him again, the man with the silver spectacles. But this time, he wasn't across the street. He was in the garden. Just standing there, looking up at my window. When I went out to ask who he was, he disappeared. No footprints. No sound. Just gone. Something tells me this house is more than a home. It's a doorway. And not everything that comes through is from this world. I turned the page, my fingers trembling. June 20, 1947. I found the old chest in the attic. It's heavy, iron-bound, locked tight. But I hear something inside it. A ticking, like a watch. Or maybe a heartbeat. I don't know what I'll find when I open it. But I think it belongs to me. Or maybe I belong to it. I looked up toward my own ceiling. I had never been in the attic of this house. It was one of those things I always meant to do. Check for insulation, old boxes, maybe a raccoon or two. But now, it felt as if it was waiting. As if I was supposed to go up there. The journal in my lap, I rose, found the old folding ladder in the hallway, and pulled the ceiling hatch open. A cloud of dust rained down, musty and thick. I coughed, reached up, and pulled the stairs down. Step by step, I climbed. The attic was dark and smelled of aged wood and forgotten time. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the beam across the space. Dust motes danced like fireflies in the air. And then I saw it. In the far corner, under a tattered sheet, was a trunk. Iron-bound, just as she'd described. I approached it slowly, my heart pounding louder with every step. I reached down, pulled back the sheet, and brushed off decades of dust. It was beautiful in a strange, ominous way. The lock was rusted shut. I knelt beside it, trying to remember everything I'd read. My grandmother had been here. In this very attic. She had seen this trunk. Maybe she had left something inside it, or maybe someone had left something for her. I didn't try to force it open. Not yet. Instead, I stood, backed away slowly, and descended the stairs. Back in the living room, I sat with the journal, turning page after page. The next entry was different. June 24, 1947. I'm leaving this here, in case I don't come back. There are voices in the trunk now. They say my name. They say things I've never told anyone. I'm afraid, but I also feel drawn. If you're reading this, and the trunk has opened, then it was meant for you too. Be careful. The past doesn't like to be disturbed. That was the final entry. No signature. No goodbye. I closed the journal and stared into the flames. What had my grandmother found? And more disturbingly, what had she entered? I didn't sleep that night. And when the morning came, the trunk was no longer in the attic. Morning light poured through the kitchen windows in sheets of gold, but the warmth did nothing to soothe my restlessness. The clock ticked louder than usual, and even the birds seemed cautious in their singing. As though nature itself sensed that something had shifted. The trunk was gone. I had climbed the attic steps again just after sunrise, flashlight in hand and heart pounding. But where the iron-bound chest had sat the night before, there was now only an impression in the dusty wooden floorboards. The sheet remained, crumpled in a heap, yet the object it had covered had vanished, as though lifted by invisible hands. I paced the attic for nearly an hour, examining every corner, every cobwebbed nook, every beam and rafter. I tapped the walls, slid my hand along the floorboards, even looked up to the sloped ceiling as if the thing might be suspended there, defying logic. Nothing. No marks of dragging. No sign of intrusion. Just silence, thick and unmoving. I descended the ladder slowly, every step heavier than the last. My home, my quiet, unremarkable house, now felt like it was holding its breath. Later that morning, I sat at my desk and stared at the journal again. I flipped through the pages once more, searching for something, anything, that might tell me what had happened after her final entry. But there was nothing. No folded notes tucked between pages. No hidden writing in the margins. Only her last, ominous words. The past doesn't like to be disturbed. I leaned back in the chair, rubbing my temples. I wasn't the kind of person who believed in ghosts, or at least I hadn't been. I believed in misplacing things, in overactive imaginations. I believed in coincidences, but lately, that belief had been fraying at the edges. I needed answers, and I knew where I had to start. That afternoon, I drove to the Historical Records building in town, a modest brick structure nestled behind the old library. The woman at the counter, Mary, according to her nameplate, was polite, though her expression turned curious when I asked about property records from the 1940s. Family research? She asked, pushing a logbook toward me. Something like that, I said. The Trenham name didn't appear in the town registry until 1951. Strange. That was years after the journal entries were written. I felt my stomach drop a little. I tried searching the address instead, my current home's location. That turned up a different name entirely. Eleanor Whitcomb, owner from 1939 to 1950. I asked Mary if she had any newspaper archives or obituaries for that name. She pointed me to a microfilm reader in the back. It took nearly an hour, but I found something. An article, dated July 1, 1947. Less than a week after the last entry in the journal. Local woman found unresponsive in her home. Miss Eleanor Whitcomb, a known recluse and resident of Maple Hollow for over a decade, was discovered in her attic late Thursday night. Authorities say there were no signs of struggle. Miss Whitcomb was reportedly mumbling incoherently when found, holding what appeared to be a pocket watch. She was transferred to the Whitmere Sanitarium for evaluation. Neighbors report odd behavior leading up to the event, including claims of hearing music and voices from her home. A chill ran down my spine. The timeline matched. The trunk, the whispers, the watch. And yet, the name wasn't Eliza Trenholm. It was Eleanor Whitcomb. I returned to Mary, journal in hand. Is there any chance Eleanor Whitcomb changed her name? Or used an alias? She shrugged. Could have been. Happens more than you'd think back then. Especially women who moved after, well, traumatic events. Was she ever released from the sanitarium? Mary clicked through some files on her terminal. Says here she passed away in 1950. Never left. Cause listed as natural. Though, she added, they often wrote that down when they didn't want to explain something. That night, I barely spoke a word. I sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, the journal lying open beside me. I was starting to wonder if my grandmother had assumed someone else's identity. Or, if she had somehow lived a life that had been buried beneath someone else's. And then, just before midnight, I heard something. The unmistakable sound of a violin. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the house. Soft, slow, mournful. I sat up, heart hammering, and followed the sound down the hall. It was coming from the attic. Again, the attic stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed, flashlight trembling in my grip. The music grew louder, but it wasn't just music, it was layered with something else. A whisper, a breath. I reached the top and swung the beam of light toward the far wall. The trunk had returned, exactly where it had been the first time. The same iron bands, the same rusted lock, as if it had never left. I dropped to my knees, the journal still tucked under my arm, and reached for the lock. This time, it fell open with a soft click, like it had been waiting. The lid creaked open. Inside, wrapped in an embroidered cloth, was a pocket watch. A violin string, and a photograph. The photo showed a young woman standing in front of the very same house I lived in now. Her back was to the camera, but there was something familiar about her. The shape of her shoulders. The way she held her hand on her hip. Like a memory I couldn't quite catch. I turned the photo over. Written in faded ink. To Eliza, keep it safe. Time bends for those who listen. And under that, E.H. My breath caught in my throat. E.H. Hemsworth? Had he known her? Had he been part of this story? I closed the trunk slowly, afraid that anything more might send the past crashing through the walls. But it already had. The next morning, I walked the path to Mr. Hemsworth's house once more. His granddaughter answered again, and this time, she didn't seem surprised to see me. I thought you might be back, she said quietly. I handed her the photograph. Do you know who this is? She studied it, then nodded. That's her. The woman my grandfather always talked about. Eliza. Or maybe Eleanor. He never said clearly. Just that he let her go too soon. That she wasn't from here, but that this place brought her back. Did he ever speak about a trunk? She hesitated. Yes. He said it was a keeper of echoes. He said the past hides things until it wants to be seen. Until the right person comes along. She looked me in the eye. I think he meant you. I spent the next few days in a strange kind of quiet, as if the house had settled into a new breath. The journal remained open on my desk. The trunk stayed closed in the attic, patient and unmoving. And yet, I felt no closer to understanding who Eliza truly was, or why this was all happening now. I couldn't ignore the fact that the photograph in the trunk clearly showed my house, my home, as it stood nearly 80 years ago. The ivy hadn't grown over the west wall yet. The porch had that same familiar lean. The woman's posture haunted me, her back turned just enough to make you wonder if, when she finally faced you, she would look exactly like someone you'd known all your life. Someone like me. That evening, I sat at my dining table with the journal spread out before me, trying to map the dates in her entries. I scribbled notes on a pad, timelines, names, odd phrases. Circle unfinished, she'd written. Voices in the trunk. The past doesn't like to be disturbed. I read one line over and over again. This house is more than a home. It's a doorway. Had she meant it metaphorically? Or did she truly believe the house held a power, a pull, a thinning of the veil between what was and what is? The wind stirred outside, tossing branches against the window. I looked up and caught my reflection in the glass. And just for a moment, it wasn't my face I saw. It was hers. The same jawline, the same eyes, the same high cheekbones I'd always thought came from my father's side. I stood quickly, the chair legs scraping against the floor, and backed away from the window. I had to know more. The next day, I made the drive out to Whitmere Sanitarium. It had long since been converted into a care home for the elderly, but the foundation remained. The walls, the shape, the air of forgotten stories still clung to it. I approached the front desk and explained that I was doing research on a woman named Eleanor Whitcomb, who had stayed here in 1947. The receptionist was kind, if a bit confused. "That's going back quite a ways," she said, typing slowly. "Let's see, we have some archived paper files, but they're incomplete. You may want to speak with our records archivist. She's down in the East Wing." A short walk later, I found myself in a narrow room filled with filing cabinets and the scent of old paper. A woman in her 60s, wearing reading glasses low on her nose, greeted me with a smile. "Eliza Trenham?" she repeated after I explained. "Or Eleanor Whitcomb?" "Possibly both," I said. "I believe they may have been the same person." She tilted her head, intrigued, and began flipping through a long drawer. "Well, that's curious. Not many people dig this far back unless they're doing a memoir. Ah, here we are." She slid a yellowed folder across the table. Inside were a few handwritten notes. Patient observations. Sketches, even. I turned a page and stopped cold. A sketch of the iron-bound trunk. Beneath it, someone had written in pencil. "Patient fixates on object she claims speaks to her. Repeats phrase, I must return it when the circle closes." Return it where? To whom? Another page included a photograph. It was old and blurred around the edges, but clear enough to show a woman in a hospital gown staring out of a barred window. She was smiling, and it was my grandmother. I closed the folder, hands trembling. "May I make a copy of this?" The archivist nodded, still watching me closely. "She must have meant something to you." "She still does," I replied. I returned home just after sunset. The air was electric with storm clouds gathering in the distance. I climbed to the attic without turning on the lights, flashlight and journal in hand. The trunk waited, just as before. I set the journal down, ran a hand over the iron lid, and whispered, "What do you want from me?" The silence answered. Then, without fully knowing why, I opened it again. Inside, a new item had appeared. A letter. Unfolded, the paper crackled like firewood. The handwriting matched the journal, elegant, looping, deliberate. "To the one who finds this. I don't know what year it is where you are, or who you are to me. But if you are reading this, then I've been gone a long time. My name is Eliza A. Trenham. I once called this house mine, though I never truly understood it until it was almost too late. There are doors in this world that don't have hinges. Some open with memory, some with love, and some with regret. This trunk, this keeper, holds pieces of who we were, and sometimes who we might still become. I left pieces of myself here so that someone, someday, might finish the story I never could. There is more under the floorboards. There is more in the mirror. There is more in you. Close the circle, and don't be afraid to see yourself. Eliza. I sank to the attic floor, overcome. She had written to me. To anyone like me. To a descendant, perhaps. To a reflection of herself, scattered through time. My entire life, I had felt things I could never name. Shadows of memories I couldn't have lived. Places that felt too familiar. Now I understood. This was never just about her. It was about what I had inherited. Not wealth, not property, but story, legacy, echoes. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I began to write. Not just notes. Not scribbles. I began a journal of my own. A continuation. My handwriting, shaky at first, gradually flowed into the page like ink remembering its path. I wrote everything. Mr. Hemsworth's visit. The journal. The trunk. The photograph. The name Eliza. The violin music. The whispers in the dark. And when I reached the bottom of the page, I wrote a final sentence I didn't plan, but knew was right. If you find this, it's your turn now. The days that followed moved like dreams, thick with silence, pulsing with the sense that something had shifted permanently. I walked through my home like a stranger in an old chapel, careful not to disturb the stillness that clung to the walls. I hadn't told anyone, not my friends, not my family. This wasn't the kind of story you could share over coffee or explain in texts. It didn't live in words, it lived in knowing. It lived in the ache behind the ribs when you realize the past is not gone, but folded tightly against you, like the pages of an unread letter. I kept writing, morning to night, journaling everything that passed through my mind, dreams, memories, sensations. And in doing so, I began to feel closer to her. To Eliza. And, slowly, I began to realize. I had always been close. One morning, I received a package. No return address. Wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a second journal. Not my grandmother's. Not mine. This one was blank. Except for the first page. Time bends for those who listen. There it was again, that phrase. I thought of the letter, of Eliza's words. Of Mr. Hemsworth. Of the photograph. Everything was pointing me toward one final act. A closing. A return. The circle. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I climbed into the attic, opened the trunk, and placed both journals inside, Eliza's and mine. Then, for the first time, I stepped back and looked around the attic with new eyes. And I saw it. A panel in the far wall that didn't match the wood around it. Just slightly off in color, the grain newer, the nails cleaner. I approached it and pressed. It swung inward on a hidden hinge. Behind it was a small, candlelit space. And at its center, a mirror. Oval-shaped, framed in ivy-like carvings. Its surface shimmered, though the attic was still and the air unmoving. I stepped closer. My reflection didn't greet me. Instead, she did. Eliza. Younger. Brighter. Her eyes wide and searching. We stared at each other for a long time. Two lives. Two mirrors. Two sides of the same story. And then she smiled. She raised her hand. And so did I. Not a reflection, an echo. The mirror pulsed with light. And suddenly, I saw more. Flashes of her life. Her laughter. Her fear. The violin in the garden. The man with silver spectacles, Mr. Hemsworth, younger, standing beside her beneath the elm tree. I saw her walking this house's halls, fingers brushing the walls. I saw her writing the journal, hiding it beneath a loose floorboard in the parlor. I saw the trunk arriving at her door, left anonymously. The way she opened it. The way she listened. I saw myself, too. A child, visiting this house long before I ever lived in it. My hand brushing that same floorboard. My head tilting at the sound of a violin I thought was only in my mind. It had always been calling. I had always been answering. And now, we stood here. At the end of the circle. I don't remember falling asleep. But when I woke, I was lying on the attic floor, the mirror gone, the candlelight replaced by dawn. The trunk was closed, cool to the touch. Inside it, only one item remained. A small music box. I opened it. The violin tune, her tune, played softly. And with it, something shifted inside me. Grief became gratitude, mystery became memory, and fear became peace. Weeks passed. I still walk to the attic some mornings, just to feel the hush of it. The trunk remains, but it hasn't opened again. I've kept the journals somewhere safe, wrapped in cloth, like they were when I found them. And I've started writing something new. Not a continuation, a beginning. Sometimes I sit on the front steps in the early evening, just as the sun settles behind the trees. I sip tea. I watch the light flicker on the windows. And every now and then, I see Winston, Mr. Hemsworth's dog, sitting at the end of my walkway. Quiet, waiting. When I blink, he's gone. But I always smile, because I know, some stories never truly end. They just wait for someone new to begin again. Some stories don't need an ending, just someone willing to listen. What started as a simple knock led me to secrets, echoes, and a connection that crossed time itself. Maybe, just maybe, the past doesn't fade, it waits. If this story touched you, subscribe for more powerful true tales. Like, share, and tell us in the comments, what mystery would you chase?